Just going to go right into position hold. There we go. So in position hold, I have it set, and it's oddly enough, you can do two things. You can have it in position hold without altitude hold. But you can see here, this is position hold with altitude hold. And obviously you can do altitude hold without position hold as well, so it's really up to you. In iNav, for example, that's not a choice. If you're in position hold, you are in altitude hold, period. Which I would think is what you want anyways, but nevertheless, you can choose in Betaflight. To move the craft around, you can see here, I can just move the sticks, and it will go into angle mode. It is always going to have that kind of overshoot, because it literally goes into angle mode. Then when you let go, it's going to flip into position hold mode, and then grab its position. But it's not too bad. Another thing that's in the code that's a little different is if you just drop the throttle all the way to 0, it's not going to decrease in throttle. You have to be slightly above 0 throttle to actually have it, so if I go up, you can see it will go up. If I go down, you can see it will go down. But if I just go in the middle, it's going to, let's turn that on. If I go all the way down, it's just going to hold its altitude there. That's a little different. So one thing that you'll also see is if you go side to side, you're going to see it drop in altitude. Like if I go back and forth here, you'll see how it drops and then springs back up. That is not the controller or the software. That is your barometer. The pressure changes. The pressure must go down on the barometer as it has that air going across it, which then tells it it's raising in altitude, so it drops the quad. So that's a input sensor issue more than anything. So when you see that, or if you don't want that, you can see it's going down there. That's really just a sensor issue more than anything. So don't be thinking that's a tuning issue. That's a sensor. See how it's going way down? Now when I stop it, it bounces up to its altitude. So it does really well. As you can see, just in a steady state. If I bring this down a little bit. Ooh, a little bit of a drop there. If I bring that and just hold it there, it does pretty good, I would say, for its altitude hold and position hold. So hands off, found a new option in Betaflight that you can take a little break, set it into position hold, and it will hold it there. I would think that's super helpful for cine lifter folks that just want to hold position while they're waiting for the go, so they don't have to be on the sticks all the time. You can see it's not perfect, went down there a little bit, but if you're up, you're probably not going to be hovering right above the ground. Then you're in good shape. My battery's actually getting a little low too. So after that's done, of course, we're going to flip it out of both of those, and then you want to be on the sticks there a little bit, and you might expect some changes there with altitude, so just be cautious about that depending on where you have your throttle set and all that kind of jazz. But obviously then I can just flip into altitude hold and then position hold. We're in a position hold. I don't know why I dove down there. I think that was me. But, yep. Well, that's all fine and good when we're just hovering there, but what if we're doing a little bit more dynamic moves? What if we're really pushing it forward in angle mode and then just letting the sticks go, and does it hold a lock? What if we're inverted and we just switch it into position hold? What does it do there? So let's look at it. So one big question I had with this is, let me check out position hold. You can see, ooh, not too great. Try getting a little bit better HDOP. So there's my position hold after it kind of found itself. Let's see how it goes with when I move forward. You can see. One thing I've noticed with this, now I'm looking under the goggles, it's smoother than iNav. iNav, you can get a very jerky position hold, just because of the way it uses the accelerometer data. I'm not sure if Dataflight's doing that differently. You can work it out with iNav, but this is a pretty smooth position hold, and you can see it fighting the wind there. So I do have a little bit of breeze here. You can see how it will drop down. Drops down because of that barometer data, but then doesn't do too bad. Picks it back up, gets where it needs to be, and it's pretty freaking good, man. For a position hold, especially when you're on the galls. Yeah, it drops down. And there, when you start getting off course there a little bit, when you get off, oh gosh. So there it can get you. So I think the next thing I want to know, and I think I already know the answer. So here, what it does is, so when you actually move the sticks, it takes you out of position hold, right? And I'm flying acro or angle mode at this point. And then when I take my finger off the stick, then it's going to go into position hold. It like picks a coordinate and locks it. So the other big question I had is when I'm flying around acro type style and do something like this and flip it into position hold, how does it do? And notice I have the throttle drop, so that's kind of a good thing. It's not doing great on position hold though at all. So flip that out of position hold. That was going off to Never Never Land somewhere. So that's probably not great. So let's just get it out here, calm it down a little bit, and then flip it in. And then there it's not too bad. But, oh, where are you going, buddy? I don't know if I had the stick down and it was dropping because of that or not. So there we're not bad. But if I do a big dynamic move, let's see that. Not that it's that big of a dynamic move, but let's... So it's inverted and triggered position hold. How does it do? Got the throttle dropped all the way to 0. It does not do great. It was starting to go over to Never Never Land. So you got to be cautious about that. It seems like you almost want to be sitting still. It'll flip you back over, but then you're going off to Never Never Land. So don't do that. Looks like for now you need to kind of be in a position. It's pretty freaking cold out today. You know, if I get to a spot, kind of level off, and then I can, even then you just gotta watch. A little bit of toilet bowl in there. And then you can kind of get out of position hold, right, by moving the sticks, because now I'm in angle mode, right? So I'm gonna go up a little bit. And obviously with all this, we're keeping in mind this is V1, right? So now I'm okay, right? So like big dynamic, drastic moves. If you flip it into position hold, you're probably going off to Never Never Land. You better flip it out of position hold pretty quick. But when you get a steady state and put it in position hold, it's pretty, it's not very shaky. So that's pretty good. So my best hunch with that is it has to do with the accelerometer. Just like if you're flying a whoop inside and you hit the couch, it gets kind of drunk for a little bit. I think when you're doing big dynamic moves or just some fast flying or something, maybe that the accelerometer, knowing where the gravity vector is pointing down is a little off, and maybe that needs a little bit more attention or work to see if that can be made any better. But you probably want to know, if I want to check this out, how can I flash this to my flight controller? So you go to the apps.betaflight.com website. It's going to use Google Chrome or Edge. And then from there, you're going to do expert. You do all the checkboxes like I have shown here. In my experience with this, you have to press the bootloader button or whatever on your flight controller, then plug it into USB so it's in DFU mode right off the bat, and then you click this no reboot sequence. Mileage may vary, maybe other people, maybe that's just me with my flight controller. I'm doing a lot of this stuff with the same flight controller, SpeedyB F7 V4. Nevertheless, you click development here, you pick your board, then come down into here, options you are going to need. You're going to want altitude hold mode in there, I would think. You will probably also want to have magnetometer as well. You will work a little bit better with a magnetometer integrated into your GPS unit, but is not required. There's a use mag off option in the CLI. In the near future, you will probably also see up here something that relates to position hold, and you would just pick that here as well. But for now, what you're going to type in down here is pause _hold _mode. That also may change to position _hold. Just that, not pause, hold, mode, just position _hold. Shortly after this PR gets merged, which I would think is going to be within the next week. So it's probably going to be position _hold, and I would say within a week or two. And I would further say that probably in a week or two as well, you're probably just going to be able to select it in that pull down box. Once that is done down here, you hit load firmware, which is right there. And that will build it for your specific flight controller down here. And when it's built, you will hit this flash firmware button right there. Now, this is a good time. I'm going to remind you, and there's going to be other prompts that remind you that this is development firmware right now, so use at your own risk. This should be for testing or just curiosity's sake. You know, I don't know if I would be really putting in a kind of production rig, but that's up to you. You're a big boy. Seems to work fairly decent, but again, this is still a development build. We're not at the stable release yet for Betaflight 4.6. Once that is all done, you just get your flight controller all set up. I would recommend before flashing it, you'd save a diff, and then you can reload that back in. If you don't know how to do that, you probably shouldn't be messing with this right now as an unstable release. And in here, you will see a altitude hold mode here, and a position hold mode as well that you can have on. Obviously here you can see that when I am in position hold with aux4, I am also in altitude hold because this thing is stretched further. That's what I would recommend, to have both at the same time, but you don't need it. You can have them two different switches and have it activate with position hold only, and then you're adjusting the altitude manually, or vice versa. If you do go into the CLI, most of the stuff for this is under Get Autopilot. So if you just type in Get Auto, you will be able to see things like your min throttle, max throttle. You're going to see your gains for the controller, for altitude controller and position controller. Also, if you're in here and type in Get Mag, you will see down here there's a position hold without magnetometer, and you would turn that to on. And in that case, with that being turned on, then you would have to fly forward for a while. Then it calibrates a virtual magnetometer, and that virtual magnetometer will then be used in position hold. Per the PR, reading that, it's not going to work as well. But honestly, iNav has the same functionality. It works pretty darn good. So I wouldn't, I'd give it a shot for sure. Obviously, you want to be careful with it and all that good stuff. But yeah, you have to trigger this to mag, trigger that to on. You have to fly forward for a while before you could turn on position hold, and yeah, give it a whirl. Well, that will do it. I will drop a link to this PR down below. This is the one that introduced position hold, so you can read all more about it. Big, huge thanks to Chris Thompson for introducing altitude hold and position hold to the Betaflight project, and with follow-up encouragement by Limon and Karate Brat, they're thanked in this post as well, and I know they're very active with helping out and doing their part for code reviews and test flying and all that kind of good stuff, and cheering Chris along. I know this was a lot of work for him, and he's been engaged in Betaflight for a long time. If you're interested in a little bit more depth on this, check out the link below. I'm going to have a Patreon video. We're going to go through the black box logs that, with these flights, and showing some of the parameters that you can look at black box to tune it out a little bit better if you are interested. What are some of the terms made do? There's some low pass filters involved. Just really get into the meat of it, and how you can really take it to the next level on understanding how position hold works. Please do thank Chris and all the Betaflight devs that work hard on this stuff below. I will also have a link to the Betaflight Patreon if you're interested in that, and you should be. I'm a patron of Betaflight, to give back to these guys that give so much to the community. See you guys on the next one. So today we're going to check out altitude hold and the upcoming release of Betaflight 4.6. So again, altitude hold is not in the current stable release of Betaflight 4.5, but it is in the development build of 4.6. We're going to compare that with iNAD's altitude hold iNav has had altitude hold for a long time, and we're going to check out how Betaflight performs versus iNav's altitude hold in a head-to-head comparison. But I first want to cover the elephant in the room. What does it matter if Betaflight's adding GPS navigation modes if iNav has them already, or ArduPilot for that matter? Well, the really important thing from my seat between iNav and Betaflight, the big difference is the filter performance that Betaflight offers and the PID performance. So generally, no other firmware provides the same amount of performance that Betaflight does in regard to filter performance, how well it can filter out vibrations and noise, and how well the PID controller works to keep the quad on the sticks, basically following your finger inputs, the least amount of latency through its just the implementation of feed forward and some of the other things that have really been tweaked out over the years in Betaflight. But touching back on that, the filter performance between iNav and Betaflight is very distinguishable. If you take a quad from Betaflight and put it on iNav, you are not going to get the same strength of filters. Sure, iNav has low pass filters, the dynamic notch, and the RPM filter, but there is differences in how well those filters work. Head to head, iNav's low pass filters basically are the same thing as Betaflight's low pass filters. Where the deviation starts coming into play is with the dynamic notch and the RPM filters. The dynamic notch in iNav is called the matrix filter, but in Betaflight it's just called the dynamic notch. And although both use notch filters, the peak detection in Betaflight is far superior than iNav. iNav is really running on the old dynamic notch code for how it is doing peak detection, and it's only detecting one peak. And then it can put, with the matrix filter, it can detect the peak on roll and put notches on roll, pitch, and yaw when it's in 3D mode for where the peak is on roll, and then do the same thing for pitch. It'll detect the peak on pitch and put notches on roll, pitch, and yaw. Same thing on yaw. So that's how you get the 3x3. That's why they call it the matrix filter. But that peak detection is old. We've noticed in Betaflight, this is one of the things I actually contributed, is I noticed in Betaflight years and years ago about how the dynamic notch was not really detecting peaks all that well, and it had a very narrow window that it would operate within. That kind of got a lot of people started out. I didn't make the code improvements myself, but I was kind of part of the, hey, why doesn't this work right? And, through the log analysis, and, why do I still have peaks that are, above the 200 or 350 hertz range that really aren't getting tracked by the dynamic notch? A lot of people have done a lot of hard work on Betaflight's notch detection algorithms and improved all that. And now Betaflight can detect up to 5 peaks on each axis independently. So that's one piece of it. The RPM filter is another piece. Betaflight's RPM filters are using bidirectional D-shot data, which is very fast, where iNav's RPM filters are using the ESC telemetry RPM data, which is really slow, like 1 milliseconds to 20 milliseconds difference. Well, that makes all the difference in the world, because by the time iNav, if you have a lot of big motor input and swings in RPM, like a racing quad or some dynamic moving cine lifter, by the time iNav moves the notches to there, the peaks are already at a different location. Now, if you're just doing a cruising flight, iNav is fine. Big lumbering quads that aren't changing RPM very fast and abruptly, then both the dynamic notch and the RPMs in iNav work fine, because those peaks aren't sliding or moving around. But if you have a lot of dynamic input behavior, like a cine lifter or some other big quad or some sort of racing quad or something like that, then yeah, it's a little slow. So hopefully with that we can understand, why is it important that Betaflight's adding GPS modes? It's because you're combining GPS behavior with the performance that Betaflight has baked in. But before we get into how to set up altitude hold mode in Betaflight 4.6 and future releases, let's check out a comparison between the altitude holds in Betaflight and iNav on a head-to-head. So checking them out side by side between Betaflight and iNav, I want to draw your attention to the upper left-hand corner of Betaflight or to the middle of iNav. And we enter into altitude hold mode right there. You can see that Betaflight automatically puts you into angle mode, whereas iNav does not do that. You can still be in acro mode. Of course, you can also be in angle mode if you'd like, by just using your modes in a good way to have one switch, put them into both. But that's a fundamental difference between the two as of right now. And that could be fairly significant. It's, altitude hold is kind of nice when you can trigger it and then just for a long range cruise and just hold the altitude as you're, you can tilt the quad forward and kind of let it go, and it will hold the same altitude, and get almost like a cruise mode for some long range flights. The next thing we're going to look at is going back and forth here with the quads. And one major fundamental issue with altitude hold on quads, any quad, and any firmware, even both here you'll see, is that the barometer data throws things off. So as I go back and forth on both, you'll see that the quad dips down. So what's happening there is that air pressure is changing. It should be going down, I would guess, on the barometer. And that is causing the quad or the firmware to think that the quad is raising in altitude where it's really not. So then it pushes it down to the ground. And then once you stop moving, it detects that. The pressure, I would assume, builds up because it's lower altitude, and then it adjusts accordingly. So a big part of tuning altitude hold mode is a tuning for that bad data, and it's not a PID controller tune, it's really the sensor inputs tune between how much of the barometer data you're using versus how much of the GPS position, altitude position, and vertical velocity that the GPS unit can report as well. How much of a mix between those two that you're using. So that's sensor inputs are the biggest thing. And now iNav has great resources and traces and stuff that you can look at. And if you're interested in that, I have a Patreon video that's going to be looking at that more closely. And I have a Patreon video that looks at that in iNav, and we're going to be looking at that in beta flight here as well. So if you're interested, check out the link below for that. Now in this piece, we're just going to look simply at how quick each of them raises by default. So you can see here, iNav has about double the rate for an increase of speed. Those are just parameters that you can adjust in Betaflight and iNav, kind of the climb and descent rate. But it's just important to know that Betaflight is kind of nice and smooth and slower, and iNav's a little bit quicker. So if you're interested in checking this out for yourself, you can do that right now. Betaflight 4.6, although is in beta and development release, so you have to keep that in mind, is available to the public in general, and it's pretty easy to get up onto it and use it. Now, the first thing you'll need is you're going to have to use the web browser version of the Betaflight configurator. The old configurator will not support Betaflight 4.6. If you flash up to it with the old configurator, you can do that, but it's not going to let you connect to it. So you will have to use the web app. It's app.betaflight.com, and you just type that into either Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge. Yeah, Edge, and maybe another browser or so. Now, one thing you can do with this browser is if you want to switch over, there's a little button here that at least you'll see in Chrome that you can actually download the firmware, so it's not like web-based, it's actually on your computer, and then you can just run it there direct. So to do that, you're going to look up here for a little link. It will be like a little download and install link. Mine's already installed, so I'm just going to shortcut to it directly. And you can see with mine, even when I hit the shortcut now, I have to hit open here. And then it will open the web app here, and then at that point, I can actually turn and close Chrome. You can see Chrome's a separate application here, so I can bring that up and close that out. And now I'm directly in the Betaflight app locally. So if people wonder about like taking it out to the field and stuff like that, I'm not using the internet here, although I'm going to need the internet anyways to flash it, but nevertheless. Then you can auto detect your board. If you're not connected to it, you might have to go up here to the top, find my USB, and then it will I'll bring up a dialog here where you can hit connect. And then from there, you should be able to auto detect your board. You will need to have show release candidates selected there. And then you have to change this first drop down to development. And then from here, you should be able to click auto detect once that's connected up there and auto detect your board. And then you should see the Betaflight 4 or the 4.6.0 dev as a selection option. What I need to do on my flight controller is I actually have to unplug it, hold down the DFU or the bootloader button, and then replug it back in to make it work. So I have this no reboot sequence selected here, and that seems to be as related to this web browser, but you can try it either way. So by default, give it a shot where you're selecting, with it. So it does do a reboot sequence, and this would then kind of auto detect in DFU mode, but just be aware of that. Now, the next thing you need to look at is to make sure down here that the altitude hold mode is an option for that you're going to be loading in the custom build for your firmware. Also, GPS typically, though you shouldn't need GPS. I haven't tried it without a GPS unit yet. Although you shouldn't need GPS, but maybe make sure both of those are on, and then you can turn off other stuff if it's if not going to fit on your flight controller or whatnot. From that point in time, so obviously having alt hold mode there is important. Pick any of the other selection options you need. That's normally should hopefully be normal at this point with Betaflight. And then we're going to hit load firmware and then flash firmware to our flight controller. So after you get your flight controller set back up, one of the things you want to do is go into the modes tab and assign a switch to the altitude hold mode. And that will be the switch that you're going to trigger to enter into altitude hold. But before going out to check it out, you're going to want to go into the failsafe tab and then pay attention to this throttle hover point here. So you're going to want to have general gist of where your hover point is for your quad, so that when it's entering or exiting altitude hold mode, it's not jumping or descending rapidly on you. So that can just be a general gist and guess. A lot of times this is fairly close, and the 1275 that's in here by default is probably a little lower than what your quad hovers at, but it's a little safer that way. But pay attention to that. If you want it to be kind of more seamless without any jumps back and forth, you're going to want to put your hover point in here. And this really relates to like 27.5% throttle, right? If you'd have in a 1300, that would be about 30% throttle. So a lot of times I'm just looking at my sticks and like, yeah, I'm about 35% throttle is where my hover point is. So that you'd put that in. So if it's like 35%, it'd be 1350 would be what you'd enter in here. To do that, you may need to trigger into GPS Rescue, enter this value, save and reboot, and then you can come back and set this to either land or drop, and then save and reboot again. So just keep that in mind. That brings these values. Right now I can't change them here unless I have GPS Rescue enabled. So obviously if you're using GPS Rescue, you'd have that enabled anyways. That's basically it. Pretty sweet and simple. Hopefully with that, you can check out altitude hold mode. Again, if you're interested more on tuning and some of the parameters in altitude hold, check out the link below to a Patreon video. It talks about that in a little bit more depth and detail. We get into the CLI, and there's a PID controller for the altitude hold. It definitely works differently than iNav, which I also have a Patreon video on that as well, on how to tune that up for altitude hold. But yeah, check out those links if you want a little bit more depth on it. Thanks, everybody. Hope this helps, and I'll see you on the next one. Feed forward. What is feed forward? And as surely you see the term feed forward in Betaflight and you see it in iNav, that obviously it's going to be doing the same thing, right? And it's doing the same thing between quadcopters and fixed wings, correct? It's the same term. Well, it's not that simple. In the RC hobby, we use the term feed forward pretty loosely, and it means two very different things between quadcopters and fixed wings, and it acts very differently between Betaflight and iNav. So let's talk about it. Now, luckily, there is similarities on what feed forward does between Betaflight and iNav on quadcopters versus fixed wing. That's right. I talked about Betaflight now supports fixed wing, and kind of always did, but in Betaflight 4.6, it's going to support it even a little bit more. Not as well as iNav, but it is going to be supporting fixed wings a little bit better than it has in the past. So what feed forward does for quadcopters in Betaflight and iNav is it's measuring the rate of change of your stick moves. So if I take a stick and move it kind of slow, that would give me a feed forward signal. Let's just say it's 5, just picking a number. If I move my stick fast, that's going to give me a feed forward signal, say let's 100. So if I move it super fast, then maybe it's 150, 200, depends how fast I can move my fingers. And the higher the feed forward gain is, the higher you would get in that stick movement. So if I would move my fingers slow again, but I would double my feed forward gain, so instead of that 5 number, maybe it goes up to like a 10 number. So again, between Betaflight and iNav for quadcopters, multicopters, multi-rotors, whatever you want to call them, it is measuring the rate of change of your stick move. It's like the little mouse accelerator that you have in Windows, and however fast you move the mouse is how fast it kind of launched the little mouse cursor off to the left or the right. That's what it's doing. And what it's doing with that signal is it's sending it directly to the mixer, to the pit sum, which then goes directly into the mixer to kind of compensate and get the quad moving on a roll left or roll right or flip forward or backward. Again, in Betaflight and iNav, that rate of change is going to try to boost the signal, get it right to the motors to get them spinning up. And we're not going to wait for the P term, for instance, to notice that there's an error like, hey, I moved the sticks, but the quad didn't move yet, and then the P is going to do its calculations. And we're not going to wait for that. We're just going to detect how fast we're moving it, send it right to the pit sum, and go. But for fixed wings like this bad boy, the difference on what feed forward does between Betaflight and iNav is a really big difference, and you need to know and understand that if you are dabbling with fixed wings in either. So what feed forward is doing in iNav for fixed wings is it's actually adjusting how far your servos throw when you are in acro mode, not in manual mode. When you're in manual mode, however far you move the sticks directly adjusts how far your servos go. It's like there's almost no flight controller there at all. It almost be like you'd hook your servos right to a receiver in manual mode. However, when you're in acro mode, if you set your feed forward gains, these guys right here, here, and here, if you set these to 0, your control surfaces here, as you can see here, they will hardly move because, again, feed forward in acro mode is adjusting how far your servos throw. Now, you don't want to confuse that here with the roll rates, pitch rates, and yaw rates in your rates tab. That has to deal with what is the sustained rotational rate in degrees per second, how many degrees of rotation per second can the airplane or quadcopter do. Now, luckily with iNav, you have auto tuning in the modes here that you can check on, set to an auxiliary switch, and then go fly your plane, and it will tune your feed forward and your max roll, pitch, and yaw rate, your max feed forward for all 3 axes and your max rates for all 3 axes. That is the only thing that auto tune tunes for a fixed wing in iNav. It does not tune your P, I, or D gains at all, period. I really think it should be called something like auto rates or something like that, because it seems like auto tune, it would tune all the gains, but it doesn't. It just tunes your max roll, pitch, and yaw rotational rate, and also the feed forward gains to achieve that rotational rate. Now, the other weird thing in iNav with feed forward is that on the GUI interface, you can see right here, it's called feed forward. But if we hop into the CLI here, this is where it really gets funky. If you're using a fixed wing, it's called feed forward or FF. So if I go into here and type in get FF underscore, you will see there I have a fixed wing feed forward, roll, pitch, and yaw. But if I'm using a quadcopter, it is not called feed forward for that. You can see that's the FW for fixed wing abbreviation. In the multicopter MC mode, if you're using iNav for multicopter or quadcopters, it's then going to be called the control derivative. So if I type in get CD underscore my CD term here for multicopter, that's actually the feed forward gain you'll see on the GUI. So again, if you're in fixed wing mode or have a fixed wing, your CLI variable is going to be the fixed wing underscore feed forward underscore. But if you're using iNav for multicopters, it's going to be MC underscore CD for control derivative. And the control derivative means basically it's the rate of change, and that's what the word derivative means, rate of change. And it's the rate of change of your control signal. So it makes sense for what it's called in quadcopter terminology. It's just confusing because there's 2 different things depending on what you have there. Now in Betaflight, feed forward between a quadcopter mixer or a fixed wing mixer is going to give you the same thing. Feed forward is feed forward, period. However, there is another term that's not exposed yet on the CLI that's called the S term, or servo throw term. So in that one, we'd have to adjust for now those terms in the GUI, and you would type in get S underscore. Then if you browse down, you will see this S underscore pitch, S underscore roll, and S underscore yaw. They're all set to 0 as the default because fixed wing is very new. And as of this video, you have to load a special use underscore wing as a define to bake the build to even have them show up in the CLI at all. And that will change in the future. So I'm talking about Betaflight 4.6 as of this video. It's not even released yet, and once it's released, maybe that's changed, and maybe in Betaflight 4.7 or 5 it's more formalized. But as of right now, as of making this video, if you want to control the servo throw in acro mode, not manual mode, in acro mode, then you would have to adjust these terms, and they work the same in principle. The same principles work the same with these terms, these S terms, as feed forward does in fixed wings in iNav. Okay, so hopefully that helps. I know it might be a little confusing, but again, at least I'm here telling you about this stuff, and you're not trying to just wander through the woods and figure it out. Just remember, feed forward in iNav has to deal with servo throw, and iNav and in Betaflight feed forward, and for quadcopters have to deal with the magnitude of how fast you're moving the stick. So it's like an accelerator to get the quad to kick into a move or feel a little bit more tight in your stick tracking and feel a little bit more connected to your stick inputs. However, in Betaflight, feed forward is still that, and then you have the S terms that deal with how far the control surfaces move in acro mode. Again, in acro mode on both of those is where these things come into play. If you're in manual mode for fixed wings, then you're just flying the thing. It's like it's not even have a flight controller, you're just flying it by the sticks, and there's no manual mode. Well, yeah, there is no manual mode in quadcopter, so you're using the flight controller all the time, or you wouldn't be able to fly the thing. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to drop them down below. And if you are interested in some of the new goodies that Betaflight has for fixed wings, I'm going to be doing some content on that. So make sure you hit subscribe down below. Thanks, everybody. Hope this helps. I'll see you on the next one. So this is what you can expect on a tune with iNav just out of the box, right? And you can see the PID values down there. That is the default in profile 1 if you don't reset the profile. And now let's see what it looks like after we tune. You can see it kind of tightens up. So let's flip around and check that out the other direction.
Flight mode 2.
So again, this is kind of the out of the box. You got a little bit of a breeze here, a little bit of shake shimmy. And then notice the PIDs down below, and then what happens when we kind of tighten those PIDs up. It just tightens up that tune, that shakiness. And I'm not done with this. You can keep moving those PIDs up, but you can kind of see that difference and how much difference the P and the D gain make in this whole tuning operation here. And this is a pretty handy trick here where you can kind of change your PID profiles with iNav. It's really handy to kind of do A, B right in the same flight. So let me change that back to flight mode 1. And you can see how it just kind of tightens it up.
Auto tune mode.
You can go into auto tune. So from what I understand with auto tune, I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing here. Just kind of banging the sticks. You can see what it's doing on the gains, but it's not really adjusting the PID gains. It's not really adjusting those P's and those D's. It's adjusting the feed forward and the rates. So auto-tune doesn't really, in my experience, adjust your P and your D gains. You have to do that manually. So it's not a full auto-tune, as you might suspect. Again, you can see those gains down there, and you can see how it's adjusting those feed forward gains. All right, so that's enough of the tuning.
Normal.
Let's see what we see now we're that tuned out. See what we see. Just do angle mode again. So that's flight mode 2. That's what we did the auto tune on. Let's hit flight mode 1. And again, you can just see it kind of tightens it up. Still a little shake and shimmying. You can see how it tightens it up. Flight mode 2 again. Get more yaw, a lot more bobble on the roll.
Flight mode 1.
Go with flight mode 1, kind of tightens everything up. And again, we can go farther on that as well.
Manual mode, acro mode, manual.
And you can see there, I got kind of oscillations. So you can see here my P and D gain are too high. As I speed up, I get D-term oscillation. So that's telling me my PIDs are too high for that speed. As you can see, as I increase speed, I start to get that P-term oscillation. I can pull back up. Obviously, I can also just exit out of acro mode at this point. So that's a good showing of how, and you can see where it's occurring on too, where I'm too high on my roll axis right there. It starts to go to P-term oscillation. If I wanted to exit out of that,
Acro mode.
I can just take it out of acro mode, but that's obviously way too high on my my D term there for that, for those PIDs. I mean, look how I'm getting pushed around in manual mode. So at this elevation, oof, big push. So I'm pushed all around on this thing. So it really goes to show how much that stability of the flight controller is helping. You know, I need to manual. Look how much I'm getting pushed around in manual mode here. So it's significant. It's a significant help. And then, you know, similar to like prop wash, you know, there's no silver bullet where you're going to be just not having it at all. But you can lessen it, and, you know, how stiff do you want it to be to that response? You know, like that big push that it just had there. You know, if I put in stability mode, see, I don't have to do anything, and that all goes away. I mean, look at that compared to manual mode, where it's just shaking all over the place, coming off, your nose going off course, and so on and so forth. So stability definitely does help smooth things out versus just, you know, flying it by the sticks. So it's a pretty windy day. Let's see what we get in manual mode. You can see here, if I just don't touch it, how it will just kind of blow off course and shake and shimmy with that. Now, of course, I can always, well, honestly, if you put in any other cruise mode, so you can see the shakes you're getting in manual mode, and how she's kind of blowing off course there. So let's see what the same thing we get with going into a stabilized mode.
Acro mode.
So this is acro mode with some P gains. And you can see the P and D kind of working it to keep it more stable. But you're going to get some of those micro kind of twitches. But here it's not going to blow off course so easily either. So it's kind of what you're looking for is the key there. And then we can switch to
Flight mode 2.
Flight mode 2. Now this is just I gains. No P or D. And you can see it's pretty good, just in I gains alone. But it does shake and shimmy a little bit more
Flight mode 1.
compared to having some P and D. So let's bring this around and check that out again. See what you can get. Again, the P and D gains here.
Flight mode 2.
If I go to flight mode 2, just I gains. Kind of see the difference there.
Flight mode 1.
How it tightens it up. See how it tightened it up there? Again, it's nice and tightened up with the P and the D gains. So let's take another look at this. It's manual mode. Kind of blows all around. Takes a lot more active control, of course. You know, you got to correct for things like